Good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to another PAIT Group and Joy of SharePoint webinar. We are thrilled that you are here with us today as we illuminate Microsoft 365. Specifically, we're going to talk about Microsoft lists. Everything old is new again, and not just new, but better than ever before. So we're excited about this. If you've never joined us before, my name is Joy Apple. I work at PAIT Group as a modern workplace strategist. I've been doing the Microsoft product and technologies thing for about 12 years now, and I love it. I get to today in my role as a strategist help clients and customers get from where they are today, maybe in older versions of SharePoint or file shares or Google Drive, Google Docs, and bring them over into the modern world of Microsoft 365, and I can't imagine doing anything else. It's fantastic. I have with me today, as always, Richard Calderon. Richard, how are you?
Doing pretty well, Joy. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us. So again, as Joy mentioned, our roles are modern workplace strategist at PAIT. Basically, it's a customer success focused role. You know, the kind of the two biggest things we often hear from our customers who are really getting into the cloud these days is, you know, how do I get started? I know that I need to do something, but kind of getting unstuck and coming up with that strategy and a series of plans can be challenging. So that's one of the many things we do. And then we also really try to help intentionally drive the value of those services, that you can really drive meaningful and intentional adoption of Microsoft technologies like Microsoft Teams, et cetera. And then now talking about Microsoft lists, you know, what is that all about and why would I use them and how do you make them, again, valuable for people within your organization? So that's the type of thing we do. And we are extremely fortunate to have one of our teammates as a guest on our webinar today to really help drive deep into this thing called Microsoft lists. So we have Allison Roney, or Allie Roney, with us here today. Allie, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, we'll go ahead. So I'm Allie Roney. I'm also with PAIT Group. I have been working professionally with SharePoint for over 6 years now, and like Joy, absolute SharePoint nerd, loving it. I've recently started to think of myself as the SharePoint therapist, where one of my favorite things to do is come into an organization and talk about what their problems are, their pain points, and how can we get through that together. And then, you know, focusing on getting that adoption and getting those strategies in place. I'm also a huge document management and list enthusiast. So when Microsoft Lists came out, I was like, ooh, okay, like this is right up my alley. So when they asked me to join in the webinar, I was like, count me in.
Awesome. We're looking forward to getting into this content here today for all of you. Like we always do, we have a short poll. Like to just understand a little bit about who's joining the webinar today, and then just a couple of questions we typically ask around the topic at hand. So again, we want to know who's who in the room. And then at the very least, just wanted to understand, have you looked at or started using Microsoft lists for tracking information? And then if so, what kind of information are you tracking? Issues or requests or kind of progress on your work or anything else? So let's take a quick glance and see what we've got going on here today. Thanks for responding. So far, we've got folks that are IT pros, welcome. And then kind of half and half, it looks like at the moment, in terms of using lists versus not. So again, that's great. Hopefully this will be useful and informative information for you today. And then in terms of the type of info that people are tracking, it looks like, yeah, we've got kind of a mix between work progress and issues and bug tracking, and then got some other information here that we're tracking as well too. Just kind of curious what we're doing here. It looks like issues and travel requests, obviously, okay, not using it yet or not applicable, obviously, for those of you that aren't using it. So, okay, well, great.
Question.
Yeah, so thanks
again. We didn't put it in the poll.
Yep.
But if you're not using lists to track information, what are you using? I'm curious. I want to know, what are you using to keep track of stuff? Are we just writing it down somewhere? Are we using Excel or Smart Sheets? I would love to know. So if you want to jump into the Q&A panel and just put it into chat unless I just can't read. Nope, I just can't read, right? Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, great point. Great point. How today do you keep track of information that's really important to you? That could certainly be to-do lists of sorts. Again, those of you that have been in our webinars before know that we're huge proponents of Microsoft's fit for purpose list tracking, to-do tracking applications like Microsoft To Do and Planner. But where does lists fall into that too? So yeah, definitely chime in the Q&A. If you're not necessarily using lists, but you're using other types of tools or not tools at all for tracking info, we'd love to know that.
Hopefully you're not like me and you're just trying to keep it all in line in your own head.
Ooh, yeah. I'll get away from you real fast. Herding cats up there.
Yes, most definitely. So List has been out for a little while, right? And we've been talking about the official Microsoft lists, and there was some great information that came out at Ignite. And the other day, Stephanie and I were talking about it, and she's like, Allison's writing a blog on lists. And I was like, oh, really? She's going to be on the webinar. And Stephanie said, oh, I didn't know that. I said, she doesn't know that yet either. So literally right then, I go into Teams and I ping Stacy. I was like, okay, we need to do a list webinar, right? Because it's really big and people are talking about it and it's awesome. So of course, Allison, being the awesome Allison that she is, she's like, heck yeah, sign me up for the webinar. But I think something that's been really interesting is those of us that have been doing SharePoint for a while, we're all kind of circling around this thing called Microsoft Lists and going, okay, wait, but isn't it just SharePoint Lists rebranded? And Allison confirms it, Microsoft confirms it. Yes, these are our SharePoint lists that I don't think have really gotten the user adoption that perhaps they've deserved, because we all really love our Excel spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. But Allison, what do you think? Are we about to see lists take over the world?
I hope so. The thing that I think makes these a little bit more accessible than spreadsheets and even just like normal SharePoint lists is their ability to go across platform. So you can use them in Teams. You can also just go directly to lists without having to log into SharePoint or log into a different application first. Like it's its own contained thing now, which up until now, it wasn't. You had to go to SharePoint, or you had to go, you had to open Excel and you had to start from scratch, and Excel templates were never really that helpful for list capabilities. Like if you're doing, pivot tables and stuff like that, like, of course, that's the way to go. But when you just want like a list of information, this is where the bread and butter is going to be. And I am really excited about this. I've been playing with the templates like all week now. And I was telling Joy and Richard before this started that I can't wait until they start incorporating this functionality in just like my home office suite, because as like a home user, I can see so many uses for this in my personal life that I'm just like, okay, Microsoft, gimme. I need this.
So let's jump into it. We were all we weren't on a webinar. We were on a call the other day. And I think the three of us definitely agreed that the coolest thing about the first thing you see when you click on that lists icon is the dashboard. And Allison, you really took some time and you went in and you set up some lists and you were poking around. First impressions, what you got?
First off, it is super easy to use. And the templates are like really approachable, because how often, do you open a template and it sounds like exactly what you want, but then when you go into it and you start digging around, you're like, oh, these aren't the columns that I thought they were going to be, or this isn't what I think of when I think of, travel management, or, whatever the template is. I've created about 4 or 5 lists now using the templates, and every single one I'm like, dang, they have columns in here that I didn't even think about, and I want that column. I'm just like, and they're appropriate for what I'm doing. And it's just like, okay, they really put the time into fleshing these templates out in a way that made sense. And the dashboard is just so clean. Sometimes SharePoint, especially the old SharePoint UI would be really, really cluttered. And especially when it came to making lists, it was overwhelming. As a newbie, it's like, oh, what am I doing here? Or it's just like a normal user. It was really overwhelming. But the Microsoft Lists UI is so user friendly. I'm like, why did it take you guys so long?
Yeah, I would say that the dashboard for lists, when the app finally showed up in the app launcher along with all of your other apps, that's the first thing that struck me right out of the gate too. Sort of the light bulb moment that went on was like, okay, I've got these lists, some that are mine, they're just for me because I'm tracking data that matters to me, and some that are shared because they're really for a team of people. But it doesn't really matter where those lists live. They could be mine, they could be shared in a number of different SharePoint sites. That dashboard really just helps provide that singular view of them so I can get to any and all of them really easily, which was certainly not something that you could do easily before with just normal SharePoint lists. So I think, yeah, by far that's the thing that struck me as most useful right out of the gate. It also really just reinforced for me this whole notion of, again, you could take just about every single tool and capability in Microsoft 365 and think about it in terms of the two, whose is it? Is it my information or is it our information that's shared? Yeah. Because Forms has sort of my forms as well as shared forms. Obviously, OneDrive is my documents, whereas SharePoint is our documents. And so lists, same paradigm here, right? You've got my lists and then you have kind of our shared lists. All from the dashboard, which is great.
And like all those other things, it's really easy to turn your my list into an our list. And it's really easy to transition from one to the other, which that didn't used to be the case.
Very much did not ever used to be the case.
Right.
Yay, Microsoft.
Yay. Yeah, so that, kind of leads us into our next talking point from that dashboard. Not only does it show you your existing list, but it also gives you just a really easy way to create your new one. And I mean easy, like it's not as complicated. Even the blank lists are a little bit easier to work with because they're in the new Microsoft 365 user interface where you can add the columns from the list instead of having to go behind the scenes, and you can drag and drop them. The templates are, like I've been saying, they're just like amazing, and they come with built-in formatting and built-in views. Like some of the templates have grouped views already set up for you. Like we're all used to, you can use an Excel spreadsheet, but it's better than the SharePoint from Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't take as long, and it was a little bit easier to use that interface. And then, of course, you can go from an existing list. So if you have a list that you need to replicate for whatever reason, you can do that really, really quickly without having to worry about, well, am I a site collection administrator? Can I create a list template? Can I create a list from a template? And all of those things that were so complicated in replicating lists in SharePoint. Microsoft really took a lot of those complaints and addressed them. And I'm just like, oh, so nice.
Yeah, I only tried the from Excel list creation one time, and I did run into, I guess, a little bit of an issue right off the gate. Maybe my particular Excel spreadsheet wasn't quite in a format that was going to easily translate over into a list right away. But I am curious, Allie, did it seem to you that it was pretty straightforward to go in from an Excel spreadsheet?
It was, but there are just like with creating an Excel list in SharePoint, there are complications sometimes. Excel treats certain data types differently than SharePoint does. Yeah. And depending on how your table is formatted, sometimes it does get a little hiccupy. So it's not like a perfect smooth, I have the spreadsheet and now I have a list, but it is certainly easier than it has been in earlier versions of SharePoint. And I think that Microsoft is hearing those concerns and addressing them appropriately. And I think that we'll see that as this list tool grows, that the ability to create the list from Excel is going to grow as well. So like we'll be able to treat our date columns as date columns instead of as string columns, and it'll still carry over correctly.
Christmas is coming.
Christmas is coming.
Got a couple of questions that came in the Q&A that I think would be worth addressing briefly. The first question is the templates the only thing that sets it apart from a regular SharePoint list, or because it's an app on your phone too?
So the templates are not the only thing that set it apart. I guess like what sets it apart from a regular SharePoint list is that it's no longer contained within SharePoint. It is in its own little nebulous of like a list world. So you can share a list directly with another person without having to share a SharePoint site with them. And you can create these lists in lists, and they're not associated with a SharePoint site or with a team, or with there really are like their own little world now. And I think what we'll see that as people start adopting Microsoft lists, that we'll see more and more templates and more uses and things that are coming into the list circle instead of existing in the SharePoint world where they are right now. So I think that really that's the biggest difference is, yeah, you have all these really cool templates, and yeah, you have this really easy ability to create and edit them, but mostly it's that they're no longer relying on SharePoint. They are in their own little place.
Great. And then another question we had is, will the older SharePoint lists show up in the dashboard as well, or only lists that are created in Microsoft lists?
So in my experience so far, the older lists do show up as well. So one of the things that I learned when I was writing my blog post, I was just playing around with it, and I went into one of our demo teams and I was like, well, I'm going to add a list to this team. And when I went to do that, it detected all of the lists that already existed on that team's corresponding SharePoint site. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to only see the lists that I had created in my list app. So it does have the ability. It may be limited only to modern lists at this point, and that would make sense given that, Microsoft 365 and team sites and everything. So, if you're in an older SharePoint environment, it may not recognize those automatically. But if you're in, the new Microsoft 365, I do believe that it'll recognize those lists in addition to ones you create in lists. Oh, nice. Older classic list showed up in your tenant. Very cool. So there you go. It does work on older ones as well.
Good to know.
Features there that we used to really spend a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there. I know you're going to be doing a demo for us very shortly, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on the slides because you're going to get to see some of this stuff live, folks.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit.
Yeah, so let's just keep hitting those highlights, then get to the demo.
Yeah.
Built-in formatting. I think the color coding, that's been around for a little while in libraries and lists, but the fact that this stuff is just built right in it's amazing.
Yeah, color coding out the gate blew my mind a little bit. And you don't have to figure out, like, it's so much easier to figure out how to get the formatting on there. It used to be you had to do like calculated columns and HTML and all this stuff, and now it's just like, boom, it's in there. It's super easy. The ability to share. Yes, sharing is caring. That's funny. That's what I called it in my list too. Like we've kind of talked about, this is no longer limited to within SharePoint. So you can take a list and say, I only want to share this list with somebody else. And, they have access to, maybe 3 of your lists, maybe all of your lists. It's kind of up to you. And like sharing out of your OneDrive, you have that same ability to set like, okay, anybody that has that link can see it. The access to it expires in, such and such amount of time, etc. You've got a lot of control over, when they can see the data and not just who can see the data. And frankly, like, I used to manage permissions in a government site for thousands of users, and we didn't know half the people that had access to anything, and if they still needed it. And then it was like, how do you know whether or not they still need it without taking it away and having them complain at you? And like, so all of the new capabilities of like sharing are just like, oh, where has this been all my life? And Microsoft List is no exception. They're really making it easy to collaborate with your data.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction just especially for anyone who's come from the legacy quote SharePoint world on premises back in the day when you had My Sites. Really, in the cloud, you really do have a My Site still. They refer to it as your OneDrive site, but the reality is you have this site collection that is your site. It stores your documents. That's where your OneDrive is. And it can now also have all of these custom lists. So it's really all of those lists are they're private to you rather. And then you can, just like with OneDrive, as Ali said, you can share them with other people from your kind of quote unquote my site. So yeah, really slick the way that they did this. Okay,
and then I think the hot topic next, and I think this will be our last slide before we jump into Allie's demo, will be lists in Teams, because we know Teams is the hub for teamwork. SharePoint, Stream, Planner, tasks, lists. It just makes sense, right?
It sure does. And this was where they kind of blew my mind a little bit, because like obviously being a huge list nerd, I get really excited about the things that lists can do. But sometimes, and I think like we've all experienced this in one way or other, when Microsoft tries to integrate two of their tools together, it just misses the mark. And you're always like, ooh, it was so close, but not quite there. I was absolutely like astonished at how smoothly lists translated into Teams. And when I first went to add a list to a team, it looked right. It had the same functionality and everything that I expected it to have. And it didn't look like I was ham jamming, a list into a place it wasn't supposed to be, which if you pin an Excel spreadsheet as a tab on a team, that's how it looks to me. Like if you go to that spreadsheet and you try to manage data, it's like, this doesn't belong here. This isn't how this is supposed to go. Mm-hmm. But when you put a list in a team, you're like, that is exactly how that's supposed to be. And it just makes it so much easier, instead of having your users have to go open their team site in SharePoint and then navigate to the list and then, I do almost all of my work in Teams, and I'm sure you guys are the same way, Joy and Richard. I don't know, how our listeners are today, but I like this ability to stay in one interface, one tool, and be just as productive without ever having to step foot in SharePoint or in my sites or in lists or, wherever it may be. And like I said, when I saw that it actually worked, I was like, oh, yay, and I just celebrated. So that was my favorite part.
Show us more. I think we actually had a comment that said, ooh, we want to see more.
Yeah, somebody said we want to look at color coding. So we'll look at that a little bit. Because like I said, a lot of it is built in. So you don't even have to know how to color code. It'll automatically do it for you. And then some of it is just really easy to set up yourself. So we'll look at that here in a little bit.
Great. You want to take over the steering wheel there?
Sure. Let's take over. All right. So I was just playing around a little bit with some of the templates. So I've got an issue tracker out here, which, I think that's one of the most common uses for lists, especially in SharePoint, is issue tracking. And the color coding that's automatically built in here is based on this status column. So when you have an item that's new, it's blue. If it's in progress, it's gray. And then there's a couple other automatic colors that get assigned here. You also have the ability to format other columns if you wanted to. So you could probably, you can have different levels of color coding, but then you kind of run into, a little bit of seizure medication. Like, you people might start needing that. But it's so easy to come in here and add a new item, using the new item form and go through and you select your priority and you select your status and everything. Or just like in SharePoint, you can do the quick edit and then it looks like a spreadsheet. You can come in here and just do it that way. You can copy paste bulk items in here like you're used to. You can, then you can export it to Excel and do stuff with it in Excel. You've still got your Power Apps and your Power Automate capability, but it's all in lists instead of in SharePoint. So I'm still just like, oh, I can't believe it took them this long. Today I was playing around with this template. I don't remember what the template's called. This is the event itinerary. So a lot of you might know that our Vice President, Mark Rackley, he hosts an event every year called the North American Collaboration Summit. And I went through and I saw this event itinerary and I was like, I wonder if Mark could use that for his NACS next year. And I was like, well, let's just create a list for it and let's just add some items just to find out. And right out of the box, it has session name, session code, what type of session. I didn't have to create any of these options. And they matched exactly what Mark was using on his website. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like they went to his website and looked at his agenda. You can have the speakers, the start and end times, you know, how many people can attend the lecture, etc. You know, give it a label, whatever you need to do. And I added, you know, just these are 2 actual events that Mark had on his calendar. There's a workshop that he and Stephanie put together, and then there's a lunch event, and it color coded automatically by what type of session it was. And then this is where I found out that it has automatic views built in. So I can come in, I've got a grid view and a list view, which are really quite similar. And then it's all got a built-in grouped view. So I don't have to go in and create that view, which I would have done. And to be honest, I'll probably go in and create another view, you know, maybe one grouped by speakers, or, you know, maybe see all the events that happen on one date or something like that. But I was like, how cool is that they anticipated that this was the first view I was going to create, and they created it for me. So that's really, like, to me, that's just really cool. And it says that, like, somewhere out there, someone is listening to the sorts of things that people are saying, hey, I would really like this sort of thing. So the other list that I've out here is, like, when I was writing my blog post, I was like, I'm going to make a list of the things that are in my blog post. So I created an item for each blog item. And so, you know, I came in here and I was just like, now I can create lists for everything. And that's really, like, that's going to be my life for, you know, a little while. It's like, okay, how can I use lists to make this a little easier? How can I use lists to play with that? So let's come in here and let's go format this column. And we're going to apply some conditional formatting. And let's see.
And there's some magic just right there. And
right.
Folks, you can do this in your document libraries too, because libraries are lists. So a lot of this goodness you see is going to be all around the place.
Yeah, so I'm going to say if it is not one of my top 2 items, we are going to make it pink. So here now my top 2 items are, you know, gray, and my bottom 3 items are pink. And I've color coded my list. And then, you know, if you have a column that's a choice column, for example, you know, you can say if choice is equal to this, make this blue. If choice is equal to that, make it green. You can, and then you can group by that column, and you have all your blues together and all your greens together. But sometimes you don't want to have all your blues together. You want to see, like, how are they interspersed with my other colors? And you still have that capability in here. I didn't have to go create a custom column. I didn't have to go Google the code that I need to put in that custom column and, you know, figure out which web part, you know, add a content editor web part to my page that would hold the HTML that would run and apply it to the column. And that was all stuff that I used to do regularly. Like I had a list that I color coded for the government, you know, many moons ago that had a column that had a bullet in it that changed the symbol and the color based on a due date. And when I finally got it working, people thought it was magical. And, you know, they seriously showed it off in meetings for like 2-3 weeks. And now I'm like, oh, like all of that work. And now I can do it in like 2 seconds. It's just like, man, like all of the time that I've wasted, you know, doing these complicated things. And now it's just so easy. But then I'm glad, because I'd rather them, you know, look at it and say, how can we make this easier than continue to slave away at these really difficult processes? So those are the things that I've really been enjoying, and just kind of playing with it. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to, you know, obviously because I have access to it, I'm probably going to start creating, you know, lists for personal use out here, you know, when appropriate. But I can't wait until the average person sees this and sees how they can use it. And, you know, Microsoft is like, hey, how can moms use this to organize their kids' sporting events? You know, how can dads use this to help keep track of, you know, what sort of duties they have to do around the house? And, you know, how can families use this? And that's really like, that's kind of what I see is where this is going next.
Yeah, I would think that as someone who has a personal Microsoft account and, you know, therefore I've got a free OneDrive in the cloud, you would think it would probably be similar, right? Because if I can have my personal OneDrive files out there, can I have my personal lists out there? It would be pretty cool, right?
I think it's on the horizon. I genuinely do. And like I was telling Joy, you know, we're planning a vacation. I want to use this event itinerary to plan my vacation, you know, because we're going to go to Disney World and I want to put character meals on there and, you know, meet and greets and, you know, we have fast passes for this ride at this time. And, you know, I want that capability in lists because, yeah, I can do it in Excel, but frankly, it takes too long. And, you know, I ain't got time for that, especially when I'd rather be just going to Disney. So, you know, that's really where I'm hoping that they go with this next, is that they start opening this up outside of the business world.
Oh, Joy, you're talking, but you're on mute. Sorry.
Because my dogs were wanting to bark. So I was going to say, you could just do that in your OneDrive and claim it as product development and research.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I don't actually know if lists has the ability to do a Gantt chart. So let's go look at that.
I was poking around and it does, but if you have to go to, of course, to your list settings.
I was going to say you have to go to the behind the scenes settings.
Yes.
Yep.
And then the 2007 way.
Create view. Gantt view.
And we're not seeing this on your screen.
Right.
You're not. It's interesting.
No.
It says it's sharing still.
You are. We're seeing the NACS. There it is.
Yeah.
There
Interesting.
What I saw when I did it with the issue tracker is there wasn't a date completed column. So I went and created one real quick because I'm a cheater.
Oh, there you go.
But that's a good question.
What's the word on the calendar view for lists? I know that's supposed to be either coming or I don't know if it's out there yet. Has anyone seen it?
It is not out there yet because that was one of the things I checked when I made my event itinerary, because that was my first question was, okay.
Got it.
Oh, so let's see. It doesn't look like, because I didn't include the session type column, it doesn't look like we get color coding right off the bat. Let's see if we can.
And it looks like it's going old school.
Yeah, it sure is. Let's see what we can.
So I'm curious for folks out there that are watching, maybe this is the first time you're really seeing some of the stuff that you can do in lists. What are your thoughts so far? One of my goals in life is to attempt to reduce the insane number of Excel spreadsheets there seem to be out there in the world these days. I'm not anti-Excel. If anything, I think Excel is anti-Joy. But we have a lot of us that are trying to run our business from Excel. And it's a wonderful tool. It's a powerful tool, but it's not, you know, the robust database that really a lot of our critical information should be stored in. So I'm curious, do we see some potential to maybe take some of those Excel spreadsheets, bring them into SharePoint, bring them out of a file that can be corrupted and into, you know, an actual robust data store? Just curious. Feel free to jump into chat with that one.
Yeah, and I similarly am interested to know. I saw a few people when we asked earlier about if you were using lists and for what you were using them. Saw a few people post using them for to-do tracking and so forth. And so, or that maybe you might have been using to-do before and now you're using lists. And so, and actually I'll open this question up to you, to Allie and Joy, where you guys see the delineation between, say, the task tracking apps that Microsoft makes available specifically for tracking tasks, that is Planner and Microsoft To Do, and then now the fairly recently generally available Tasks in Teams app that kind of brings those two things together, versus doing tracking of tasks using Microsoft Lists. Kind of curious as to anyone out there, what you have determined for yourself, when you might use one versus the other and so forth. How about you guys? Any thoughts on Allie, if you're creating lists, it just kind of makes sense, right? You're like, I've got a list of things to track or a list of things to do.
Put a
Why
due
not
date
just
in
create a
here.
list of it?
No, that is a good question, because I do struggle with that. Even in my personal life, I struggle with, like, what's the difference between like a list that I need to keep track of and then like a list that I just need to be able to cross something off of and then forget it. And to me, that's really where the thing is do I need a historical record of what I did and when, versus is this something that I just have on my plate and when I eat it, it's gone. And so that to me is where I draw the line. So if it's something that, like, I have to call my internet provider and say, why is my internet being so slow? I'm not going to put that in a Microsoft list, because I don't need to know in 6 months, well, maybe I do at this point. Like maybe I need a record of my communication with Suddenlink. Be like, hey, right. I've called you about this 4 times now and you're still not fixing my internet. But if it's something like, take out the trash, I'm going to put that on a to-do list and then mark it complete, and I'm not going to go back and be like, oh, did I take out the trash 4 months ago? Because if I didn't, then I'd still have it. So like, that's, right. To me, that's where the difference is. How about you, Joy?
That's a good train of thought. I like that a lot. And we have a comment that came in that said, yep, if the calculations and the tab relationships can be replicated. There is a lot that you can do with calculations inside of lists. I once did some training out at NASA many years ago, and there was a lady there that had an amazing list, and she had amazing calculations. She was like, I don't even have to touch Excel anymore, and especially if you're still working with anything on-prem. Excel can corrupt very easily if you have multiple people hitting it on multiple versions of Excel. And if you've ever had an Excel spreadsheet corrupt and no one could open it, that's a bad day. Because we tend to put a lot of mission critical content inside of Excel. You at least want to have that in a SharePoint library. We have a version where you can roll back to, get to something that's uncorrupted. Or how many times does someone mess up the whole spreadsheet for everybody? Because we're sharing it among the whole work group. And then the whole worksheet's messed up for everyone, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So if we bring that into a list where every item has its own version, not just the spreadsheet as a whole, but every item has its own version history. That's super powerful. It's a little bit of a different formula, so there's some more learning that would have to happen to be able to do those calculations. It's not a one-to-one language relationship, but I think it's totally worth it to get something out of a document and into a database. Because remember, even though it's in the cloud now, we're still storing this data inside a SQL server. That's powerful. We still have backups, we still have restores, we have version history, we have life cycle management around all of that mission critical information that right now is in something that's very, very fragile, where we could put it in something more robust, like a SharePoint, or I'm sorry, a Microsoft list, and get way more out of that data. That was very preachy, and I appreciate you hanging in there for it.
Now, the tab capability, that is not quite as robust in my experience, like the ability to reference information on another tab, for example, or, make a duplicate of this and then, make changes to it. But with that ability to create a list based on a list, that kind of gives you that ability to replicate a tab and then make changes to it. So they're kind of like, I think that's really where they're headed is, okay, how can we take the things that are like the bread and butter of Excel and that aren't pivot tables and, data charts and things like that, but how can we take like those column calculations and those column functions and apply those in lists? And I really do think that that's kind of where they're headed. Is, okay, well, these are the sorts of things that people do in Excel. How can we do those in SharePoint or Microsoft Lists or, whichever area you're working in? But I do think that functionality is coming if it's not already there. And like Joy said, a lot of the calculation capability is there, if not more. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do, but it does get a little developer-y, if you don't know the, if you don't know it, you don't know it. And a lot of end users aren't going to be able to go and just like, oh yeah, I can do this. But in Excel, you can kind of, force your way through it. And it's like, oh, hey, cool, it worked. So I think they'll get there, but they're not quite there yet.
Awesome. What was there anything else you wanted to show, or should we give people the sneak preview of what mobile is going to look like?
Oh, let's do a sneak preview.
Sneak preview. Who wants to do the slides?
I can do that here. Let me pull that back up.
All right. Okay, so we're going to give you guys a link to the breakout session from Ignite on Microsoft Lists here towards the end. So there's good information. In fact, it was so good before the workday actually started Monday, I was sending it around to people on Teams. It's good. And I totally got these screenshots out of that. So on the Lists mobile app that's not dropped yet, we checked yesterday, so we're lying if it hit today, but you're going to have a great mobile interface where you can get to your favorites. It's just like everything in the SharePoint world, right? If it's your favorite, you click the star to add it to your favorites list. So you'll be able to do that and have your favorites very readily available. And then your recent lists. Then you can go to My Lists, right? Super easy. But here's the cool part. So we'll flip to that next slide. Hopefully it will autoplay. I think I set it to autoplay. If not, you may have to click the play button.
Stand by.
Somewhere.
Oh,
But they've put
there.
some, there it goes. Look at that. So as you scroll, that title of your item is going to shift to the top to stay with you.
That's pretty slick.
That is the bomb diggity. I am just so excited. So I'm going to have to put everything I can in List now just to be able to play with that.
That scrolls nicer than my screen on my computer. Like it's easier to keep track of it. I'm like, okay, I kind of need that.
Isn't that amazing? It's just amazing. And in the video that's going to be in the link that we're going to drop into chat, it shows the easy way that you can go in. The little edit form pops up at the bottom from whatever you click on. So you'll be able to create and edit on the mobile app. And let's be real. If it weren't for work, I would probably live my life on my mobile device, right? I really wouldn't be logging into a computer that often. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm so excited.
Super cool.
It's super cool. Thank you, Microsoft. Do we have any other questions, observations, what ifs out there? Remember, once this hits, once you start using it and you're like, oh, this is great, but I wish, go to that user voice. The user voice is where Microsoft gets our feedback to make these products better. And if you want people to vote on your ideas of the user voice, tweet them out and ask people to vote for them. That's how we do these days. It's pretty fantastic. All right. Well, okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got our information up here. Allison, I didn't put your LinkedIn up here.
Oh, that's okay. I never get on there anyway.
I guarantee.
I know I need to, but
Allison.
well, I mean, I had a security clearance for so long, and everything, you know, when you do that, it's like, nope, you don't want people to know who you are or where you are or what you're doing, and you know, it's hard to get out of that habit. But now I'm like, no, I need to break into the social world a little bit.
We sure go back and point out email and Twitter handle. If you want to continue to engage and ask questions with Allie, you can certainly do that.
And I have to say, shout out to that Twitter handle, by the way.
I love it.
That was our own Nick Nick Battaglia came up with that back in the day.
See
so
that?
I have to keep it.
Rarely erroneous. Love it. Love it.
I don't like to be wrong.
So rarely.
All
yeah, well, thanks again, everybody. Obviously, really appreciate you guys jumping in, asking questions. We love these webinars, and so that's the reason why we wanted to continue doing that. And thank you so much, Allie, for joining us here today. Super informative. I learned a couple of things or two. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to myself or Joy, either email, Twitter. That's our LinkedIn profiles, those QR codes there. And we'll be looking for some more webinar information coming out soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Have a great day.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.